Oh, it's time for final thoughts, and I have a question for the self-righteous Hollywood liberals. Why so silent on your boy Harvey Weinstein? Seems to me a powerful white man with a long history of sexual harassment would be at the top of your attack list, but not this time. I wonder why. Could it be because Harvey Weinstein is one of your own? Could it be the wealth, power, and longtime support for the Democratic Party that has your tongue? Over the last 25 years, he's given about $800,000 to your candidates and causes, so I'm not surprised. Where was Jimmy Kimmel when the story first broke? The self-appointed moral leader of our time finally tweeted his disgust over the weekend. What took so long? When the Trump Access Hollywood tape came out, late-night hosts and Hollywood liberals clutched their pearls like the world was ending. It was literally all they talked about, and they're still talking about it. But why not Harvey Weinstein? Couldn't fit in between the anti-Trump and anti-gun propaganda? These Hollywood and entertainment types like to think they're so brave, so morally superior. No, you're not brave. You're the most spineless and intolerant bunch of people I've ever seen. You blacklist, shun, and shame conservatives. Your agencies and production companies are disgusted by Trump supporters, but represent and enrich wife beaters, drug dealers, and sexual predators. You cry about gun control and take a stand against law-abiding gun owners, but are too scared to call out the crooks and criminals in your own circles. You're pro-black, pro-woman, pro-LGBT, but only if those individuals agree with your politics. Your model of diversity exists where everyone looks different but thinks the same. Do you have any Trump-supporting friends? Any that can actually admit it anyway? Your writers, your agents, producers, any vocal Trump supporters in the bunch? Didn't think so. And no, not everyone who thinks differently from you is a racist or a bigot or intolerant. In fact, you're the most unloving and intolerant people around. Expand your horizons in your leftist bubbles, and maybe you'll start to understand why Trump won. Life, culture, and politics are not decided solely by the elitists in New York and LA. Those in the middle, the South, the flyover states, we are the ones watching your movies, your games, your award shows, and your late-night banter. Or at least we did until you made sports and entertainment into an anti-Trump, anti-conservative hate fest. See what's happening to the NFL? Get ready, because you keep this up and you'll have low ratings, empty theaters, empty stands, and President Trump in the White House for 4 more. LA has conservatives. Public universities have conservatives. Minority and immigrant communities have conservatives. They're just too intimidated to speak out because they're surrounded by this constant leftist groupthink. These celebrities sit around other filthy rich entertainers and look down on people who don't vote like they do. Sounds rather closed-minded to me from a group of people that pride themselves on peace, love, and tolerance. It's all an act. They use and adore guns on screen. They're pro-military when they can make a buck off a movie, pro-cop when they need protection, and silent when one of their own gets away with sexual harassment. Hollywood, you don't do what's right, you do what's popular, and what's going to get you your next $1 million paycheck. That's not courage, that's not guts, that's not integrity. Conservatives with courage, conviction, and a platform are threatening to you. Well, I'm your worst nightmare. Dirty Democrats with Hollywood connections, your hall pass has expired. Those are my final thoughts from LA. God bless, and take care. It's time for final thoughts, and I'm not done with Harvey Weinstein, not yet. More than 24 women claim sexual harassment or assault, and 3 say he raped them. So why did it take Hillary Clinton 5 days to make a statement? And why hasn't she given his money back? Well, she's now saying there's no one to give it back to, so she'll donate it to charity. It took you long enough. What about the Obamas? Michelle, you've been pretty vocal about your disdain for powerful white men lately, but not so vocal about Weinstein. Is it because he's a Democrat, a donor, an ally of your husband, hired your daughter for an internship last February? Oh, the connections run deep. Weinstein, using his ties to the wealthy Hollywood and New York elite, gave or helped raise more than $75,000 for Barack Obama and the Clintons since at least 1995. Yeah, in total, Weinstein gave or helped raise or bundle $1.5 million for Democratic candidates over that time. Maybe that chunk of change bought some silence and some good old-fashioned leftist bubble wrap. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe the Democrats and the loudmouth Hollywood liberals aren't as righteous as they would have us believe. They're not pro-woman, they're just anti-Trump, and trust me, there's a big difference. Dozens of these actors and actresses knew what Weinstein did to pretty young women and even warned co-stars about him, but none had the guts to call it out. Where were the pink hats for the last 25 years when known sexual predator Harvey Weinstein was preying on pretty young girls? Where were your marches, your signs? I'm talking to all of you activists who stood on the stage of the Women's March and screamed about Donald Trump, but remained silent about Weinstein for years, even though many of you knew he was a predator. Actresses coming out decades after the fact are now deemed brave? Brave? What about Bill Clinton's accusers? Broderick, Willie, Jones. Aren't they brave too? Maybe we should ask Hillary. Her limp response to this whole thing has proven once again she's not pro-woman, she's pro-Hillary. We all know Bill's history, but she stuck right by him, enabled it. Power was more important. Oh, and how about Hillary's right-hand lady, Huma Abedin? Her husband, Anthony Weiner, another known sexual predator. Turns out the left is full of them. So don't you dare lecture us on feminism, women's issues, or female empowerment, or tell us we voted against our voice when we voted for Donald Trump. Obviously, millions of women disagree, Mrs. Obama, which is why Donald Trump is in the White House and Hillary Clinton is peddling books at Costco. Donald Trump speaks for me and millions of other conservative women who haven't had a voice in years. But the left won't acknowledge that because it's not good for the narrative, the same way they wouldn't speak out against Weinstein because it didn't fit the agenda. This house of cards built by the DNC, Hollywood, and liberal elite is caving in faster than we can say, "Make America Great Again." Those are my final thoughts. From LA, God bless.
Media entry is going to say 20 years from now. But the larger Weinstein saga is just beginning. Many powerful people knew what Harvey Weinstein was doing and not only ignored his crimes, but actively took his side against his many victims. It's a long list, but at the very top of that list is NBC News. NBC had this story months ago. Their former anchor, Ronan Farrow, conclusively exposed more than a dozen allegations against Weinstein by women who say he sexually harassed, groped, even raped them. But the network killed that investigation. Now, NBC News president Noah Oppenheim says the company had good reason for doing that. But did the company have good reason? Trace Gallagher has taken a very close look at this question, and he joins us tonight with an answer. Trace?
Tucker, NBC News has gone on the record saying the reason it decided not to run the Ronan Farrow story on Harvey Weinstein is because he didn't have enough reporting to go on the air. Well, now a number of outlets, including the Daily Beast and Huffington Post, are refuting that, saying that Farrow began reporting on the Harvey Weinstein story back in January, and by July, he had interviewed at least 8 Weinstein accusers and had also secured the coveted New York police audio tape of Weinstein admitting he groped a 22-year-old Italian model. Listen.
Yesterday you touched my breast.
Oh, please, I'm sorry. Just come on. I'm used to that.
Are you used to that?
Yes, come in.
Then in August, a woman who accused Weinstein of raping her agreed to an on-camera interview as long as she was in silhouette and not identified. The Huffington Post says not only did NBC News refuse to provide a camera crew for the interview, it tried to stop the interview altogether and tried to stop Farrow from reporting on the story altogether. So Farrow paid for the camera crew himself. NBC says the opposite, quoting, "Ronan very understandably wanted to keep forging ahead, so we didn't want to stand in his way, and he took it to the New Yorker and did a ton more extraordinary work." But a dozen people inside and outside NBC reportedly claim NBC slow-walked the story and ran it up the corporate chain. Not just to News President Andy Lack, but all the way up to NBC Universal CEO Steve Burke, something news employees called unprecedented. In fact, some told the HuffPost that Weinstein's attorneys trying to kill the story and NBC News appeared to be synonymous. And it should be noted that last week, when the New York Times first broke the story, both CBS and ABC ran it during their evening newscasts. NBC did not, saying Weinstein was not a nationally recognized figure. The same excuse was used for pulling a Weinstein skit from Saturday Night Live. Tucker.
Thanks, Trace. So let's be clear. NBC is lying. Yesterday, News Division head Noah Oppenheim claimed NBC, quote, encouraged Farrow to report that story. The opposite is true. They pressured him to drop it. Oppenheim says, quote, NBC gave him resources to report that story over many, many months. Maybe, except for a camera crew when Farrow tried to interview an alleged rape victim. Oppenheim says Farrow's stories, quote, was not the story that we were looking at when we made our judgment. Yet another lie. As Farrow told Rachel Maddow 2 nights ago, he'd finished the bulk of his reporting on Weinstein when he went to the New Yorker. That's why the magazine accepted his piece in the first place.
Why did you end up reporting this story for The New Yorker and not for NBC News?
Look, you would have to ask NBC and NBC executives about the details of that story. I'm not going to comment on any news organization's story that they, did or didn't run.
NBC says that, you didn't, that the story wasn't publishable, that it wasn't ready to go by the time that you brought it to them. But obviously it's ready to go by the time you got it into The New Yorker.
I walked into the door at The New Yorker with an explosively reportable piece that should have been public earlier, and immediately, obviously, The New Yorker recognized that, and it is not accurate to say that it was not reportable. In fact, there were multiple determinations that it was reportable at NBC.
We'd bet money that her employer didn't want Rachel Maddow to do that segment, but she did it anyway. Good for her. So why did a purported news organization kill a blockbuster news story? Well, presumably we will find out at some point. This is a scandal, and the truth has a way of emerging from those in the end. One possible explanation is Noah Oppenheim. In addition to being the head of NBC News, Oppenheim is a Hollywood screenwriter with deep ties to the movie business and to the Democratic Party establishment. Could it be that Oppenheim had a business relationship with Harvey Weinstein or Weinstein's company? It's not a far-fetched possibility at all. And yet, as of earlier today, Oppenheim and NBC, when asked directly, refused to say. Noah Oppenheim ought to resign immediately, and if he doesn't, he ought to be fired immediately by NBC's parent company, Comcast. News executives are not allowed to tell lies. They're not allowed to participate in cover-ups. They ought to answer straightforward questions straightforwardly. When they don't, you know they're corrupt, and that's exactly what NBC News is. For more on the broader media efforts to protect Harvey Weinstein in the middle of all this, we're joined by Joe Concha, who covers that industry for The Hill newspaper. Joe, thanks for coming on tonight.
Sure.
So the red flag for me, and these are very complicated stories and we don't know all the answers, but we do know that NBC News, Noah Oppenheim, and Noah Oppenheim's agent are refusing to answer a very simple question, which is, did Noah Oppenheim, as president of NBC News, have any business relationship at all with Harvey Weinstein or his company? And they won't answer that question. What is the possible range of explanations for refusing to answer a simple question like that?
That's what bothers me about this, Tucker, that the head of a news organization is refusing to answer questions. He should go to, not to NBC News, obviously, don't keep it in-house, but find some other publication, somebody you don't compete with, sit down and answer questions. It's exactly what he would ask the journalists of NBC News to do. And you could break this down 100 different ways. Two things that really stick out at me, and Trace brought it up in his piece. 7.5 hours after this story broke on Thursday, the NBC Nightly News, which is watched by 8 million people, did not cover it. So that's the news side. The entertainment side of NBC, you have Seth Meyers and Jimmy Fallon didn't do any jokes on Harvey Weinstein for 5 nights. Then you have Saturday Night Live, as Trace mentioned. There were jokes on Weinstein, and then suddenly they didn't appear on air. So you either believe that those 4 entities decided that it wasn't a story or an order, the code red, so to speak, came down from somewhere and said, we're not going to touch this until they absolutely had to because it was blown wide open. That's point number 1. 2, we talked about this many months ago, the Access Hollywood tape. NBC property, Access Hollywood.
Right.
And it just happened that this tape walked out the door that they knew about for months, maybe longer, by the way, the contents of it, and ended up in a Washington Post reporter's mailbox 2 nights before the second presidential debate. By all intents and purposes, that should have ended the election, except the candidate was Trump, and he was foolproof to this sort of stuff, and obviously he won. So you look at those 2 simple explanations, right, or those 2 scenarios. Then compare it, Tucker, to what we saw this week from NBC News, and particularly yesterday, where they had a bombshell report, an exclusive, that said the president wanted to include or increase, our nuclear arsenal tenfold. And they have that in quotes, right? And then President Trump disputes that, but more importantly, Secretary Mattis, who's one of the most credible people in Washington, or at least respected, says it's absolutely false. What was that story based on? Unnamed sources. We don't know where those sources came from. It could very easily be somebody's father's, brother's, nephew's, cousin's, former roommate. We don't know. That was good enough to get the air. But Ronan Farrow, who had tapes, who had videotapes with actual accusers, that's not good enough for us. We don't want to get in your way. We don't want to get in your way. Go take it to the New Yorker. So unpack all of that and then ask yourself, who do you believe?